Over the 16 or so years this game has been out for, League has added and removed countless aspects of it. From champions to items to abilities to systems, it would just be too numerous to count. Sometimes there were parts of the game that were updated to make things a bit more enjoyable or modernized, even if technically speaking, the prior version was functional, a good example being many VGUs and midscopes in this game. Other aspects had to be flat out deleted from League for causing too many problems and not having any practical solution to them. I say practical because perhaps there might have been a way we could have addressed their flaws, but it would simply have been too much of a hassle. For today, I want to go over these failed mechanics, analyzing what went wrong with them, but more importantly to see if we could find solutions to them. Granted, the word failed is subjective. Some of you may have enjoyed these mechanics, in fact I personally did as well, so let's get on with it. Really quickly though, before we get into it, I just want to give a shout out to this video's sponsor, Ironside, who was actually kind enough to send me their product they're selling in question. Ironside, for those who don't know, is a computer building service that puts together gaming PCs for you, either through you choosing your own parts for them to put together or selecting one of their pre-made ones. The one they sent me in particular was the Eden's Veil, which has a nice natural aesthetic to it, and even a wood panel on the front, which I think is the first time I've ever seen a tower case have a wood part to it. In the footage, I took off the stained glass panel to showcase the inside, but I can imagine it looks really cool with the glass covering the lights inside. As someone who builds computers myself, everything was put together really nicely, even right down to the cable management, of which they sent a couple extra zip ties for me in case I ever wanted to add more stuff to it, which is nice. In other news, Ironside's hosting a giveaway for one of their milk box computers, valued around $3,000, featuring a Ryzen 7 9800X3D and a 5070 Ti, not too bad, which is running from now until the 29th of May, so if you're interested in checking it out, be sure to use the link in the description below. Ironside's a good company, I can vouch for them myself. They're pretty solid, especially if you're not confident with building your own PC from scratch. Definitely check them out. Thanks again to Ironside for sponsoring the video, but for now, back on topic. The Chemtech Drake is arguably my favorite Drake in the game next to Cloud, mostly because I enjoyed the tenacity and heal and shield power given I mostly play fighter champions with the modicum of either defense option. Chief of all though, I'm a huge fan of the plants, Blast Cone getting bigger, Scrying Orb giving that speed boost, and Honey Fruit offering a shield. There's a lot you can do with them, and it's one of the more interactive elemental rifts in the game in my opinion. Chem Soul's also quite good, even though people think it's one of the weaker souls in the game, the idea that you become tankier and deal more damage when you yourself are injured is a cool niche. So by all accounts, I love Chemrift as it is now. The old one though wins out in terms of how interesting it was. For a short while, Chemtech Drake had arguably the most game-warping rift and soul in the game. Some would say in non-constructive ways. Instead of plants, a foggy zone would be created within the 4 jungle quadrants, causing units who enter them to become camouflaged and deal bonus damage against enemies that had more HP than them, kind of like a mini Chem Soul. Essentially, it was the same as Clan Rift, only instead of a tempo increase, everyone gained camouflage. Funnily enough, Rengar had I think a 30% win rate on Chemrift because, before they addressed it, Chemrift lost all brushes around the area, preventing Rengar from using his passive. Fun bit of trivia aside, I think we can all guess how degenerate Universal Camouflage is. Though it was confined to only those areas, wards became practically unusable since enemies could just hide around it, making navigating the jungle without backup extremely hazardous. If you were on the losing end, the jungle would be off limits to you since no longer did you have to worry about unwarded brushes. The entire jungle was now one brush that you could not get vision of outside of control wards. If you were on the winning end, you still had to respect the enemy team since they could jump scare you from within the jungle if you weren't careful. It was so toxic, no pun intended, to play on Chemrift whether you were winning or losing. Stealth is not meant to be given freely to everyone. If there was a Chemrift and the enemy team had a Blitzcrank or Morgana, you could be walking headfirst into your own death. Not to mention it being next to impossible to track where the enemy jungler would be during the early game, assuming there were 2 Drakes taken out quickly to initiate the transformation. If you thought the Chemrift was bad though, wait until you see the Soul. The current Chem Soul is a hybrid of attack and defense, and only when you're below half HP. Not a bad soul by any means, but certainly not one that can't be overcome. The old Chem Soul, however, I believe was the closest we had to an instant win button. League of Graphs has a page called Drake Stats, which calculates the win rates of teams depending on what combination of Drakes you had and what soul you had. Obviously, if your team is Dragon Soul, it's a huge combat advantage regardless of which one it is. And if your team was able to secure 4 dragons, chances are your team was in a good position beforehand, which is why every Dragon Soul offers at least an 80% win rate or more. But during the advent of Chemtech and Hextech Drake, both of their win rates got as high as like 90%. They were so overpowered when they came out, and Chem Soul was for all the wrong reasons. Simply put, everyone gained a Scion passive, I'm being deadass. Upon taking lethal damage, you would heal back to more or less full HP and continue fighting with all of your abilities and whatnot, rapidly bleeding out before you died a second time. Acquiring Chem Soul would turn every single fight into a 7.5v5 due to Chem Soul turning every champion into another half a champion after you killed them. The biggest thing about Chemsoul wasn't really the opportunity to deal damage, however, it was the opportunity to do everything else. Let's say you were to snipe out the enemy Soraka right before a fight began, you can now go about the remainder of the battle without worrying about everyone healing back to full HP. But with Chemsoul, Soraka would be able to stay alive for long enough to use all of her utility spells. You can insta-kill Blitzcrank, but he respawns and gets to blow his crowd control and ultimate before dying. Beyond that, of course, damage was still relevant. Everyone would only do 2/3 of their normal damage, but damage is still damage. The only thing balancing Chemsoul was that the respawn mechanic was on a 5-minute cooldown, the same as Guardian Angel, so to an extent, the enemy team could rest easy knowing they didn't have to deal with this every single fight. But towards the endgame, a single fight's all you need to push for game. The Chemtech Rift and Soul were both so awful to deal with that for the first and only time in League's history, they had to take the Chemdrake out of the game for like a year or something if memory serves, just to figure out a proper way to showcase Chemtech. Thankfully they did. Like I said, I love the Chem plants, but holy shit, who in the world signed off on this during testing? Universal Stealth and Universal Silent Passive had to have been the single worst mechanic ever implemented. I can say with all confidence, there was no way this could have been maintained in its current state. I mean, there was technically a saving grace, knowing there was only a 1 in 6 chance of it even happening per game. This next mechanic is one that should elicit tons of nostalgia from the old timers out there. Rune pages. The modern day runes consist of different effects a player can equip onto their champion to gain additional bonuses, culminating into the Keystone rune capable of significantly altering the playstyle of a champion. Alongside selecting your primary and secondary paths, you can also equip your champion with additional stat bonuses of your choice, also referred to as shards. Personally, I don't see anything wrong with the current rune system. I think it's pretty well established at this point. But I've seen arguments thrown about on how the old rune system allowed for better personal expression and how they should have just kept the runes and masteries their own distinct mechanics. I'd be somewhat inclined to agree, but I can understand both sides of it. So for the uninitiated, the rune system of today was once two different systems, runes and masteries. Masteries were most reminiscent to the runes we have now and were the bedrock of the system. Runes, on the other hand, were a set of enhancements you could have on your account that offered a fixed assortment of stats, not unlike the shards, only there was a lot more customizability to them. How it worked is that each page was divided into 4 types: marks, seals, glyphs, and quintessences. Each type had their own range of stats they offered to the user. For example, marks, aka reds, were mainly predicated on physical attributes: armor penetration, attack damage, attack speed, crit chance or crit damage, things of that nature. Seals, aka yellows, were focused on defense, providing things like armor and health, but even a few other unique attributes like energy and mana regeneration. Then we had glyphs, or blues, which were the magical counterpart to marks, taking care of things like ability power, cooldown reduction, max energy and mana, magic resist, and their scaling versions to boot. Each of these categories also had the capability of fielding runes of the other categories, though it would of course be significantly less efficient to do so. But there was the option for it. You had players on occasion humorously running full AD pages to get like 30 extra AD at level 1 at the expense of not getting anything else. Now the final rune type was quintessences, or quints, which you could only hold 3 of compared to the other types holding 9. In exchange, they would yield substantially higher bonuses. Quints even carried some unique effects to them like bonus gold generation, bonus XP rate, lifesteal, movement speed, spell vamp, and even shorter death timers, believe it or not. So while the current rune shards only give you combinations of 3 each, you could go really in depth on variation with this one. Although ultimately the purpose of rune pages was to just give you some stats to work with. They weren't sufficient enough to fully change the champion, but they weren't supposed to be. So why did the system get discontinued in the first place? Honestly, I'm not too sure. My theory would be that it was too complicated for what was ultimately just extra stats. For one, due to the sheer number of combinations in which you could set up a rune page, it was confusing for many players. As a result, the majority simply just went for simple stat pages that could accommodate as many champions as possible. For example, they went AD or armor pen reds, armor yellows, MR blues, and AD or attack speed quints. Or for mages, you would go magic pen reds, scaling HP yellows, MR blues, and AP quints. Stuff like that. Very few if any cared to explore rogue strategies like going XP quints or move speed, since unlike the runes we have now, you weren't allowed to edit them during champ select. You had to set up your rune pages before queuing up. From an execution standpoint, the system was also horrible. You had to buy runes with IP, the old version of Blue Essence, meaning you had no way of getting them outside of just grinding hella games. This meant that new players would be playing at a serious disadvantage in relation to older accounts who had more rune pages to work with and more IP to buy them. It also didn't help that runes would unlock 1 at a time per account level. If you wanted to level up a brand new account, you would be stuck on a champion with no runes or masteries for that matter against a level 30 plus account which had a full page and all masteries accessible, leading to a really poor first experience. Additional rune pages could only be purchased with RP if I remember correctly, so free-to-plays were stuck with a single one, hence why so many just had a general AD and AP rune page. So from a quality of life point of view, I think the current rune system does a far better job. However, part of me thinks they shouldn't have given up on the old rune system as early as they did. If they addressed the poor user experience of it, players may have been more willing to mess around. I mean, I know technically we still have the rune shards, which do the same thing as the old ones, but I miss having 1% crit. Anyone else? So the first two mechanics were fairly significant in scale, but I want to take a moment to talk about something simpler: dodging. No, not Q dodging, I meant actual dodging. Long ago, there used to be a special stat in the game called dodge, wherein you had a % chance to completely ignore an auto attack. A number of items and abilities in the game would increase your dodge chance, meaning at a high enough dodge rate, it would be as if you had a permanent Jax counterstrike up the entire time. How does an auto attack based champion do anything against an enemy with a lot of dodge chance?
That's the neat thing. You don't.
Played as two caps, formerly known as Ninja Tabby, and frankly should have stayed that way. Once gave 12% dodge instead of basic attack mitigation, hence why it was named Ninja Tabby, because you could dodge stuff back in the day. Phantom Dancer also used to give 20% dodge. More confounding though is that there used to be dodge runes in the game. You could get them on seals and quints. Also, unique passives were not a thing back in the day, so you could build multiple copies of the same item. Certain champions had bonus dodge rate also, like Jax, Nidalee, Sivir, and Udyr. Jax in particular became notorious for his ability to realistically achieve a 100% dodge rate by going tabbies, multiple Phantom Dancers, and going dodge runes, getting some extra help through his counterstrike, passively increasing dodge as well. You might have seen the clip before of him literally diving the fountain late game and taking 0 damage because for some ridiculous reason Fountain Laser was considered auto attack damage. I don't think a long explanation is necessary to justify why this is no longer a thing. Passively avoiding a universal means of dealing damage is... yikes. Not to mention the fact that it was RNG. Most competitive games do what they can to lower how many elements of randomness are in their games to better highlight a player's skill level. Any aspect of RNG that's still in the game is generally kept in strict oversight. Begs the question, then why do we still have crit chance in the game when that's a pretty big deal? Funny you should ask that. Technically it's not pure RNG. The way crit scaling works in this game is that there's a quote-unquote pity system wherein if you miss a crit, the next auto attack has a higher chance of critting than when your actual crit rate displays, and if you miss it again, the next one will have even more. This guarantees you to achieve a critical strike after a certain number of failed attempts. So broadly speaking, let's say you have 20% crit, if you miss 4 crits in a row, the 5th one is guaranteed to critically strike. That way, the game prevents you from getting extremely unlucky and missing 10 crits in a row at 50%. But dodge rate? No such thing existed for that. In theory, you could get unrealistically lucky on 20% chance and dodge 5 auto attacks back to back. It was without question the most degenerate stat in the game, and the decision to remove it was met with unanimous approval. Last mechanic I want to talk about is one that's been around for a very long time but got taken out around 2024. That would be leashing the jungler. I say taken out, but it's more people just stopped doing it. It's been a thing since jungle came out where you'd essentially help your jungler take out the first camp by doing some chip damage or even shielding or healing them. As a matter of fact, for a while it was almost obligatory for junglers to get a leash if they wanted to even survive their first clear. Not to sound like a boomer, but back in our day, jungle camps were a bigger threat to the jungler than the actual opposing jungler. In all seriousness, before they made it so jungle monsters did no damage and junglers had infinite health and mana sustain when clearing, camps would actually do a significant amount of damage, so much so that if you did not leash the jungler they'd be forced to recall, otherwise it would actually get executed. Laners didn't really have to go too far out of their way for this, as minions would still not have made it to lane by then. However, there were a ton of issues with this, first being that sometimes the laner would accidentally steal the camp if they had something that could do so, like a Twitch stock, Terry's Bleed, Zyra plant, what have you. It could have happened completely accidentally, but it could ruin the jungler's entire early game. The other issue is that the junglers would inadvertently give away their starting position since Alicia would get to lane a couple seconds late, giving champions who could get by without a leash like Ivern or Warwick a huge advantage in tracking. As you know though, in the modern era, junglers no longer need a leash, nor do they even take much damage in their first clear, if at all. Despite having been a thing for over a decade, I think it was a good thing they took away leashing, since while it did encourage teamwork, it was kind of inconvenient for the jungler to have to rely on a leash to function, and for the laner to have to go through the trouble of doing so. Junglers would get pissed off at laners all the time for not giving them a leash. Alright, so those are the 4 failed mechanics in League. There are more of them, but for the sake of time, let's end things off here. Of the ones I just went over, in my humble opinion, I would love to see customizable rune pages make a return. I know there were some accessibility issues, but it's a shame they've been simplified to just be 9 stat charts at the bottom of your selection screen. As for the other 3, I'm glad they're not in the game anymore, they were just that irredeemable. What do you guys think though? Do you believe there are other failed mechanics worth mentioning? Feel free to share them in the comments. That's it for today, so if you enjoyed the video, a like and subscribe would be much appreciated. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at Vars, join my Discord server, and why not check out my failed champions video if you haven't yet. But till next time, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.